I think it is often the case that we appreciate a hi-fi component much more when we've had it in our system for a good while and we take it out and replace it with something not as good. I think the step down in sound quality is always or often much more obvious than maybe a step up in sound quality, and I think that can mean that we sometimes take good hi-fi components for granted. And I think that is maybe the case here a little bit with my review of the Audia Flight FLS 9 integrated amplifier. I do feel I have been taking it for granted just a little bit, but once I did some comparisons, some comparative listening, I realised it's a really good sounding integrated amplifier. Back at the end of last year, 2021, I looked at my first Audia Flight component, the FL3S integrated amplifier, and I thought it was a really nice and good sounding integrated amplifier for the money, and I think it costs about £2,500 currently. With my only complaint being it seemed like I needed to turn the amplifier volume up really quite a lot in order to get the maximum kind of impact and scale and dynamics from the sound, and that was absolutely fine. You could turn the amplifier up that much and its composure stayed mostly intact. Stepping up to the FLS 9 is a very big step because it costs nearly 3 times as much, £5,950. So a serious chunk of money for a hi-fi integrated amplifier, and this particular demo unit has both of its expansion slots filled with the optional DAC and Phono Stage modules installed, and that pushes the price up to a total of £8,900. And that is a lot of money for a hi-fi component, so my expectation level naturally rises with it. But I'm also very grounded because I've looked at a lot of hi-fi components, integrated amplifiers especially around this price point, so I know they can be justifiably worth it. And you are getting a lot of amplifier here, physically sat next to the Kinky Studio EXM1 Plus or the Lima Acoustics Tucana 2 Anniversary. The FLS 9 is noticeably deeper and a fair bit chunkier, and this makes sense when you look at the internals. You can see the amplifier's shape is allowing space at the rear for the expansion boards, and there also needs to be space for the shielded 1000 watt Rodial transformer, the 120,000 microfarads of capacitance, the 12 output devices and their cooling, the extra thick copper PCBs, the balanced design, and more exciting stuff. And all of that adds up to an amplifier that can deliver 150 watts per channel into 8 ohms, 290 watts per channel into 4 ohms, and 500 watts into 2 ohms. Design aesthetics wise, my thoughts are a little mixed. I think the FLS 9 looks nice, but it won't win any beauty contests in 2022 with some of the amplifiers we are starting to see be manufactured. But I do think the silver finish appears to look a little more special in the photos. I am a fan though of the solid top plate of the amplifier with the logo engraved into it, but the top plate does sit right above the amplifier's heat sinks and it does get quite warm. In fact, the whole amplifier gets pretty warm. Coming round to the front, the blue LED screen, obviously in the flesh, doesn't pulse like it does in this video, and that's to do with the camera's refresh rate being different to the screen's refresh rate. It's not something that I could fix, sadly, with a combination of settings within the camera. I appreciate it's not ideal, I do apologise, but hopefully you're okay with it for the rest of the review. But more importantly, in the flesh, I had no problems reading the display for volume, and all the other settings sat a good 12 plus feet away. And I want to start this review really with a big positive, and that is for the sound quality of the FLS 9. It really is an excellent sounding amplifier, and I have enjoyed many hours sat listening to it through the Mission 770 speakers that you can see there behind me, and it really has impressed me in a lot of key areas, and it's worked really very nicely with these speakers. And in fact, I would say in some music, the sound has been genuinely outstanding. Firstly, vocals have an excellent resolution. There is a solidity, authenticity, and a holographic nature to how they are presented that left me wanting for nothing. I have been totally smitten in nearly every regard for the vocal delivery, and I think in order to achieve that, the amplifier has to have great control over the drivers, and it sounded fast, and that carries over into an excellent soundstage with fantastic clarity from left to right and in between. The FLS9 is able to render instruments or different musical elements in space, with again nice clarity and resolution, and with some music the sense of space is extremely impressive. The treble was a little softer than I was expecting, and at first that seemed like a bit of a negative, but I soon realised it was for the betterment of some music, and there was a little bit of sweetness to how the treble is presented that adds a little bit of sparkle to the sound at times that makes music, or some music especially, just that little bit more pleasing to listen to. Bass I found to be impressive for its authority and again control. And listening in isolation, I was extremely happy with how the FLS9 was able to achieve a solid and strong bass performance with very good timing and precision. I did, however, find myself in a very similar situation to back when I reviewed the Audioflight FL3S, and that I was turning the amplifier's volume up a lot in order to get the same sense of scale and impact and, I suppose, musical excitement that I really like and really appreciate in music. And my listening room is fully acoustically treated, so it does soak up any excess sound, so I am able to listen loud, and I do listen loud without any listening fatigue. Again, this was no problem. The FLS9 allows you to turn the volume up with no noticeable degradation or ceiling point, that point where the amplifier sound starts to compress, that I was able to hit anyway. And I just wonder if it's how these amps are designed based on their volume control, and it's one of the amp's biggest quirks, which we'll look at in a minute. And it is an interesting one overall because I think the FLS9's natural sound is intended to be just a bit more relaxed and maybe a bit more easygoing, but you can get more dynamic and expression and a bit more bite and grip to the sound by turning the volume up, which is normally kind of what I do, kind of my preference of sound. And that is a really interesting one because it really brought out some fantastic characteristics of the Mission 770 speakers with some music. But when you're listening to maybe a random selection of music, say streamed from Qobuz, it's not all produced perfectly. It's not all necessarily reference quality music. And sometimes, this combination of speaker amplifier could really show you the fact that the music wasn't as well polished. But I don't really see that as a negative towards the gear, because it's not the gear's fault when a song has been mastered to sound really very loud and therefore it sounds really tense and really kind of hard and compressed. Overall, I have been very impressed with the FLS9, but I do think I was likely taking it for granted a little bit because it was doing its thing very well, but wasn't really grabbing or fighting for my attention. My focus has been more on the speakers, but like I said at the start of the video, it's sometimes when you take the product out of the system that its quality really becomes apparent. Switching the FLS9 out of the system for the Kinky Studio EXM1 Plus, which only costs about half and is, I think, an excellent amplifier for the money, it showed me straight away why the FLS9 costs more. Most of what I had been really enjoying about how my system was sounding was still there, but in a much more subdued and less special way. The vocals were recessed and lost some solidity and some of their dynamic capability or expression. The soundstage was still all there, but it sounded more faded by comparison and less resolute. And the overall scale and impact of the sound was just softer and squidgier, and not nearly as impressive. And that takes me back to my review of the EXM1 Plus, where I said it was an excellent amplifier and that I really liked it, but I think I would have liked a much bigger one much more. And that is what the FLS9 is. It is that bigger amplifier that I was referring to, and you can hear it, you can hear the sonic benefits in pretty much all of the important areas, well, in all of the important areas. But do remember, it costs twice as much. And, it costs twice as much, but when you listen to the pair of them, I think it justifies it. It justifies the extra cost. But the comparison between the FLS9 and the Lima Acoustics 2 Anniversary, which costs about the same, I found much harder to distinguish and then define to you. Both are excellent integrated amplifiers, and the difference between them is not huge. The Audioflight sounds more rounded and more pleasing. The Lima sounds more precise and resolute. The Lima had the edge for bass control and solidity, whereas the Audioflight has the edge for treble and vocal sweetness. The Lima sounds more forward and wants music to come out into the room with you and engage you in that way, whereas the Audioflight is a little more relaxed, that wants to draw you in more. The lemur gets really very loud really very quickly with the volume, so much so that I lowered its gain setting down. The Audia Flight is the exact opposite. You have the volume high all the time. So the designs are clearly totally different, and which you might prefer will depend on a number of factors. But the Audia Flight does offer something the lemur doesn't, and that is the ability to install a DAC or a phono stage or both, which could be great for you if you're looking to reduce your box count. And I am still new to vinyl playback, so I did test the phono stage and it worked, and it showed promise over the HiFi Audio Zen Phono. But I am not in a position to talk deeply about its sound quality, and I apologise if you was hoping to learn more about it. It has inputs for both MM and MC cartridges, with switches to change the impedance to suit the cartridge. The phono stage module costs £1,100, which I actually think is reasonable. And there's more good news. I was really very impressed with the DAC section that you can install in the FLS9. It sounded much better than I expected it to, and I would say for outright resolution and clarity, it bettered the more expensive external DAC that I was using. And that is the HiBiki SDS string DAC, which is a very good R2R resistor ladder DAC. However, over a longer listening session, I still preferred the sound of the external DAC more, because while the internal DAC sounds more tightly focused and precise, and that balances really nicely with the sound of the amplifier, and technically I know this is a good thing, for musical enjoyment, the external DAC had a big advantage. It just has the edge. The internal DAC does have 6 different DAC filter modes, and you can't quickly A/B between 1 and 6 or 2 and 4, for example. So it's nice to have the options, but I found once I started messing around, I didn't actually find one that was the best of everything, or that could better the external DAC. And the DAC board costs £1,850, so a fair chunk of money to have it added. But it does offer a good specification and a nice set of digital inputs, although I would have preferred to have seen a BNC SPDIF coaxial digital input rather than just the RCA, or maybe the offering of both with a product at this kind of level or price level. And I think that leads me nicely on to talking about some of the niggles that I had with this amplifier, because part of me feels like, I'm just being a grumpy audiophile, but I think given the price level of the Audio Flight FLS9, especially with the other modules installed, well then it's right to be a little bit more expecting of it. And my first niggle is with the buttons. Sometimes I press one, such as to mute the sound, and nothing would happen. Maybe it's because I just hadn't pressed it well enough. It was the same sometimes with the remote control. So maybe it's just the very small buttons and my fat fingers, but I did find it a little bit frustrating. And then you have the amplifier's menu system, which I found to be just a little bit clunky to use because there is no back button. So once you make a selection or an incorrect selection, you have to wait a few seconds for it to go back. And I did get used to it, but I found it not as intuitive as some others. But for me, the biggest niggle is with the volume control. I was listening a lot of the time with the amplifier set between about -25 and -15, and it starts from -90. And you don't really get into any real volume until you get to about -30. So there is a huge amount of volume adjustment really that's not really doing anything for the sound. But that is far from the end of the world. For me, the biggest niggle is that the amplifier remembers the last volume it was playing when you turn it off, which in a way is a great thing because you don't have to wind it all the way up from -90 every time. But sometimes if you were playing it loud the evening before and you forgot to turn it down before powering it off, well then the next time you turn it on and the volume starts rising, music is getting louder and louder and you can't seem to override the volume with the volume wheel on the front or with the remote control. And that could be a little frustrating. And also sometimes when you're in control of the volume and you're making large volume adjustments quickly, because there is so much range, the volume can lag a little behind, so it ends up being louder than you intended it to be when it finally catches up. So I have had some niggles with the FLS9, but the reason I'm calling them niggles is because none of them have stopped me enjoying listening to music. And I think if I owned an FLS9, I would likely just change my behaviour, retrain myself, just so that I was working with the amplifier rather than against it, or maybe, vice versa. And I want to finish the review on a positive, and that is the built-in headphone amplifier, which did really impress me. It sounds solid, punchy, detailed and musical, mirroring what is great about the FLS9 but back into headphones, and that was a very pleasant surprise, and it's a very, very usable headphone section. time to wrap things up. If you want it to be, the Audioflight FLS9 can almost be your all-in-one high-end music hub, where you just add your sources and it's then your amplifier, DAC, phono stage and headphone amplifier, all to a very good level, delivering a very high standard of sound. But it doesn't have to be. And I really like the fact that if we don't want to use the phono stage or we don't want to use the DAC, well then we're not paying for things that we won't use. And in the main, I have been very impressed with the FLS9 for its sound quality and overall build quality. When I think about it, lots of connections, flexibility, very good sound quality, a lot of power, I think, to drive, a lot of speakers, different sizes and more demands of speakers. But there is a lot of competition and options available for amplifiers, integrated amplifiers, some with more specification at this price point. But the FLS9, I can sit here and confidently say, it easily does enough right for you to seek it out for a demo. It's easily worth putting on your demo shortlist. So I hope you've enjoyed this review. I hope you found it useful and helpful. If you did, hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Of course you have. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.